Hello and welcome to Team Draft Tactics with your host. Today, joining us is Brian.
What's up, guys?
We also have David joining us today.
Hello, hello.
And we have Eugene.
Hi.
Finally, we have me, Roger. And today we want to talk about something really fun that happened this weekend, and that was an RCQ over at Odyssey Games, which is in Pasadena. Huge shout out to them. I know that that's kind of like the local spot that we kind of go to just for our team drafts, and it's a pretty cool place. So if you guys are around the town, then definitely go check that out. We also want to give a shout out to Jared Jenkins for allowing us to use his music for both the intro and outro of our podcast. So thank you so much, Jared. And to kick things off, David, give us a little recap about the RCQ that happened over at Odyssey Games this weekend.
Yeah, for sure. So at Odyssey, it was a one-slot RCQ. The cap was at 64 people, which was crazy, and there was 25. But it was a lot of the local people people in the draft league. There was a few people that drove up from OC, a couple of which I think made top 8. So yeah, overall it was like a pretty chill tournament. It's just a chill vibe in general playing at Odyssey because, like you said, we do all our team drafts there, and a lot of the local players, even if you don't know their names, you recognize them, you play against them, stuff like that.
That sounds awesome, man. I heard that it started with a sealed and then it went into a draft, which was another interesting thing because I know you and the team also had a team draft directly after that you had to rush over to. So please, we're going to break it down in a couple of ways, but we'd love to hear about your sealed draft experience first, and then we'll move on from there.
Sealed's interesting, especially now with play boosters. Obviously, just sometimes you get ridiculous pools. I did a sealed the weekend before at Game Cellar, and my pool in general was okay, but as you'd imagine, people are going to open bombs. They're going to play 3 to 4 colors to just play the best they can, and there's a lot of nonsense in the format. But so my sealed pool was pretty solid. It was like an Abzan pile of mostly just 3 throw from the saddle was nuts. I had pretty good fixing. I had a couple of the white-green desert. I had 2 Dance of the Tumbleweeds, which was amazing. Seraphic Steed, Journey to Nowhere, Congregation Grift, Badlands Revival, just a lot of recursion, ton of removal, and just decent creatures, which was pretty common, as you'd imagine, at the RCQ. That's just where the best spells and creatures are generally. I went, 3-1-1? And it's kind of tough because it's anyone who went 3-0, you just double draw in, so you only play so many matches. And then when I had to play out all of them, it gives you a lot more experience in the format. And I actually think this helps a little bit more with team draft than a normal 8-pod, or it helps more than you would think. So I talked to one of the guys there, Angelo. He's on the shout out to the Chump Blockers. One of the things he said is that it was helpful because it forces you to play with a lot of stuff that you wouldn't normally, and it really gets you to focus on what can I do rather than what do I want to be doing. So in a draft, you're obviously going to take certain cards with hoping that, I wheel something or I get the payoff or that kind of thing. Whereas sealed, it's right in front of you and you have to make the best of it. And I think that was really helpful coming from Angelo because I swear he wins with anything. He just puts together whatever and just kind of makes it work. And that's a skill that really matters in team draft because similar to sealed, your 17 lands data doesn't really help. It's it's there, what cards are generally good, but it's not the same format in terms of what you're picking or what you're playing against necessarily. So you kind of have to be better about your card valuations in general and building a deck with what's in front of you rather than just kind of going blindly by the data or pick orders. And that led me to play just things I wouldn't normally. I'm trying to think of what a good example was. Or even just think about play patterns that you wouldn't because it's you have to get everything you can out of these things. So one of my favorite things from the pool was Humiliate. That's the breaking news bonus sheet. Yeah, target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it, they discard it, and you put a +1/+1 counter on the creature. Discard in general is really good, especially in slower formats, especially in sealed. And it's just so good in this format where that's really bomby, really splashy, and you can just pick apart someone's hand. And even just knowing what to play with, because a lot of people have removal. And it was I was citing it in every game. It was an all-star because I just knew what they had going on. It feels like cheating when you can see someone's hand. And no one ever expects it, especially on 2, because a lot of times people are setting up their mana, playing tap lands, or just they're not really beating you down, especially in sealed. And that goes for any of the discard cards, Heartless Pillage. That's another breaking news. That one you don't see their hand, obviously, but still, it's a 2-for-1. It leads to a lot of just feels bads where they just have to discard something really good. or just they're so far behind on resources when these games get grindy that you can really run away with the game. And that's stuff that I'm sure, oh, black white is bad. Like I don't want to play humiliate or whatever. Or, discard is fine. I think more people are better about the mine routes, but I think in general, it's really easy to dismiss these things when, you have to play with like when you're forced just to make the best out of your colors, a lot of stuff like goes up in value, and that's a valuable skill in team draft where sometimes you just fewer packs. You don't always get to be, the best deck. Sometimes the cards aren't even there, and you really have to both make it work for yourself, but make sure you know what's good so your opponents don't take them as well.
David, you would play Humiliate on 2 without a creature in play?
Yeah. I'm not super aggressive and like the value's nice, but being able to plan out turns ahead is just so important, especially if it's like playing around the removal. Like I had Seraphic Steed, so it's a 2-drop and it takes a lot to saddle. So I want to know that I have the chance to saddle it profitably or what I'm attacking into because it's like a fragile body, but really powerful if it gets going. And sometimes the way your mana works are just like your turns turn out. You're going to be tapping out every turn, and you're not going to have a chance to spend 2 mana later on when you'd rather be playing, I don't know, like tapping out for the Tumbleweed 6-drop, playing both modes, that kind of stuff.
No, that makes total sense. And Seraphic Seed is a tricky card to navigate because you don't want it to get removed. It's better in the late game, but if they don't have anything that can deal with it, it can definitely get some lifelink and damage in. So knowing exactly what's in their hand makes that card so much better, and it gives you a game plan for the rest of the game. So yeah, I mean, Humiliate, seeing their hands, so important.
Yeah, so I think just stuff like that is really just something to think about in terms of how we evaluate cards and all of that. Obviously, things are different in every format, whether it's sealed draft, team draft, even the top 8 draft, because it was kind of a different feeling about the timing and stuff felt different, which I could talk about. But in general, it's just kind of like giving everything a chance rather than dismissing things. Like, admittedly, no one was going red blue, because yeah, we know it's not good. But sometimes your pool doesn't let you do that, and you have to figure it out.
Yeah, so David, tell us about getting into the top players and what decks were you seeing? And can you tell us about the 8-person draft experience after playing your sealed pool and seeing these cards in actions? Did it kind of change your picks, or did it like kind of change the way that you were strategizing going into this draft? So what was that experience like?
That's a good question because it is a different mindset that you have to shift from. Like I said, during the sealed portion, a lot of people were playing basically green, black, and white in some combination. Most likely they were splashing blue for like Bonnie Paul or, whatever bombs they had. Going into the draft, I was trying not to overthink it just because it was like, oh, I'm just excited to draft in general. But I do know that I kind of stuck in that same mindset of I want to play something grindy. I want to play like removal and stuff, and ended up in like an absent pile that was not great. And I think the main thing about that is just, again, you don't like, since you can build along the way, you do have to think a little bit more forward, but also the format isn't as slow as it, like, sealed is notoriously slow. So that means card evaluations change. Like, for example, I started on a pack 1, pick 1 Journey to Nowhere over, which I'm curious what you guys think actually. What is it? The Spinewoods Armadillo, 4 mana, green, the 7/7 reach ward. I think that card is great, but in draft, I think I want to make sure I get removal, something, when in doubt, take the cheaper card. But I think, I love the Armadillo, and my deck probably would have played it, but in a vacuum, I think that pick was right. Yeah, and I think that's like that was tough. And then part of it is also that in the top 8 draft, they elected to do like a timing, like kind of like they do in competitive REL, where you get 30 seconds, and then the judge will tell you, 30 seconds, look at the pack. It's like very methodical the way he does. It's like, open the pack, take out the token, put the pack face down, make sure there's 14 cards, then pick up the pack, and then draft, and then put it down, count it out, like all of this stuff at once. And even just getting into that rhythm was tough for me personally. And if I took more time to think about it, I don't know if I would have changed my pick, but at some points, you get rushed, and it's like, okay, well, I know I'm in this color, or when in doubt, take the cheap card, or when in doubt, take the rare, that kind of stuff. Going back, I still think it's pretty close. I think in team draft, I don't know if that changes the evaluation. Maybe a little, but still, I think removal's even more at a premium in team draft. For you guys, does it change anything? I think I still make the same pick.
I think it's Armadillo no matter what. That's to me. I think that the Armadillo is just a complete bomb. The best uncommon in the entire set. and it's one of those cards that is worth picking over a removal, any removal.
Yeah, I actually agree. Armadillo is an actual bomb, I think, and it's in a better color too. So you'd be starting with fixing with a bomb and in the best color. So I think in any format, Armadillo is great to start with over a journey.
Yeah, and in team draft, because Armadillo, that 7/7 Armadillo, so make sure we're not getting confused by the 0/4 Armadillo, which is not playable.
Right.
But the 7/7 Armadillo in green, like, it's really good. It should be, I feel like it should be the pick always, unless there's like a rare bomb. But it's also a card you really don't want to pass to the opponents, especially in a team draft, because if you're passing that card, you're gonna play against that card. And that card is ridiculous.
Yeah, and that had like an impact, I think, later in the draft because they put the person in my left into green. I was hoping to be green by a few picks I was getting from my right, and then I ended up in like an Abzan Soupy deck that didn't really do much. The picture that I sent you guys, I think it was about halfway through pack 2 that I realized like I'm in 3 colors, but I need to streamline this somehow and pick a direction, and ended up trying to do like black-white flyers, which panned out in my first match, but was just ultimately like underpowered for what I was doing. And like I think that is something I would not have bothered with in team draft because you just don't get the chance to run people over. It's really hard to put together any sort of coherent aggro deck, especially with fewer packs. So in general, you just want to pick the, I guess, like bombier, slower stuff, which I guess in this case would have been better to take the Armadillo anyways. And I think that totally makes sense. Again, it was just one of those like, when in doubt, take the cheaper card. And then that led to me like kind of waffling between green and black, and I think that also like showed in some of my picks later on. But the main thing is like it's really easy to get tunnel visioned and say I have to come up with a plan and say, okay, I'm just taking every card in these colors and not look at what's being passed. And team draft, it's even weirder because sometimes signals get messed up because someone's going to hate draft you, or someone, evaluations change and certain things aren't really a signal. In the 8-person pod, I didn't have to think about hate picking, but it would have mattered what I passed. And, I think the Armadillo pick makes a lot more sense in team draft because at very least, I don't want my opponents to have it. Like Journey to Nowhere is beatable, especially all of the white enchantment-based removal. But it's a lot easier to be like, well, at very least, I don't want my opponents to have it. I can play this card, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, David, you bring up a really good point there. I know LSV and Marshall Sutcliffe in their podcast, their recent cast, they were talking about Seth Manfield's Pro Tour draft. And one of the things that LSV mentioned that he would agree in kind of like the pick order that Seth Manfield was doing is that in that pro level kind of play, and then once you have a bomb, because I think he first picked the dragon that gets bigger when your hand gets smaller. He said it wouldn't have been rare or even unthinkable just to stay in red. You just stay in red to make sure you can play your bomb and play the good cards in red. And that's kind of like what he would have done. LSV himself said he would have done, just keep picking the good red cards that were coming in the packs, because there wasn't anything that was throwing him off of that. And you had the higher likelihood of playing your bombs, which is a very interesting mindset because it is a lot different than what we would normally think about in a 6-person draft. So I'm completely there with you in the sense of like, okay, if the pros think about it the same way, you're thinking about it that way, maybe that's an effective strategy in the 8-person pod, which you discern very well, where you're not technically hate drafting, but you are cutting the color going to your left so that it's more likely that color comes back on your right and you continue picking those cards, which is really awesome. Really love your insights, David. Now, I want to kind of shift this over. So directly after the RCQ, you sped to another location and you entered an actual team draft. So you went from sealed to 8-person pod draft to now a 6-person pod team draft. So tell us about that experience. What deck did you draft and what were you seeing? What was happening with that?
So yeah, it was very different. It was a lot of magic that day. I remember, I was texting you guys and it was like, hey, we're going to meet up at 8. And it's like, let us know by 7:30. So Roger, you could jump in. And when I texted you guys, it was at 7:30, or 7:31 or whatever. And I'm like, Roger, I'm good. I don't need a sub. It's because I just got crushed game 1 in the semifinal. And I'm like, I played it out because I'm like, well, I need 20 minutes to kill before I head over. There was no way I was winning that because like I just got destroyed. I was just happy to win the first round. Anyway, so team draft was completely different because you get the opportunity to play more colors, more stuff, and kind of just play. I don't want to say anything, but instead of this time where I don't want an aggressive plan, I'm not trying to make do with like crappy aggressive creatures more. I'm trying to now play a value game, and we all end up in more colors because I'm hate drafting against the guy to my left because we're not on the same team, and they're presumably doing the same to me. So I ended up in like a 4-color no white like control deck, which had a bunch of, it was mostly like red blue, which isn't great, but had a good amount of removal, especially, well, I mean, double Hypothesis is fine. It was like nice to get, but they all wheeled. And then I ended up in the 4th color because of Villainous Wealth in Pack 1 Pick 1. But those are picks that changed like dramatically. I still would have played Villainous Wealth in like an 8-person draft, obviously, but you have so much more time for that all of that kind of stuff becomes even more important, especially when you don't want your opponents to get it. It didn't end up mattering because the guy to my left also opened to Villainous Wealth Pack 2, but what are you gonna do?
Yeah, that was a really weird draft. So I think there were like 5 rare mythics where 2 of them were open. So we had 2 Pillars the Bogs, 2 Villainous Wealth, 2 Dust Animus, 2 Magdas, and 2 Insatiable Avarice. It's a weird draft.
I thought there were other duplicate rares, but yeah, there was a lot.
There might have been more.
Yeah, that team draft was interesting because I think all 3 of us ended up in like 3 colors, splashing like a 4th, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So we can stay on theme. You guys can criticize my other Pack 1 Pick 1 and then the more I think about it, the more wrong it was. I opened Roxanne, the thing that attacks makes a meteorite token. Whenever it comes into play or attacks, makes a meteorite, taps for a minute, and it shoots something for 2. And I took, what is it? Is it Marauding Sphinx? Is that
Marauding Sphinx, yeah.
Yeah. The uncommon. It's very good. It's one of the best uncommons, but it was like not on the same power level. And my reasoning was, admittedly, part of it was also just kind of like, I'm sick of playing Abzan. But also, like, I thought of it as like, okay, I can take a single color card, something that I think is generally not more powerful, but just more solid. Flyer, Vigilance, Scry, or Surveil and Crime synergies. And in my experience, Roxanne hasn't been like a super bomb because 2 damage is like on the borderline of being enough. But if it trades with something, if you happen to shoot something, or if it attacks more than once, like it's more than gotten like 2 cards out of someone. So that was definitely the pick, especially because I give it to someone else, and that was another one that 2 people opened. But yeah, I don't know if you guys want to talk more about that or if it was just pretty clear.
I think to me it's pretty clear. Roxanne, good card. Don't pass it.
It's pretty clear, and I also want to break down another advantage Roxanne has in its mana cost, where it's just a red and a green pip. Green has a lot of ways to get red sources, so you could just splash to red, whereas if you choose Marauding Sphinx, the 2 blue pips mean you're kind of locked into being base blue or heavy blue, and I think Roxanne also gives you more flexibility in that sense as well, even though it's 2 colors.
Yeah, and that was something that ended up happening, is that the double pip cards were harder to cast than the 2 double pip single color than the 2 or even 3 color cards in some points.
Because we end up kind of piley, right, in these drafts. Like, we're 3 colors verging on 4, and we're scrambling to make it all, like, piece it all together with whatever 2 deserts and maybe another fixing thing we have. So double pip is a real cost.
I want to add one more thing on touching on Roxanne, and I want to talk about more like I want to talk about the enter the battlefield triggers versus trigger ability and activated ability. I think that's another strong aspect of Roxanne. It has an enter the battlefield ability over the Sphinx, where the Sphinx needs you to draft multiple cards in order to make it worthwhile. You need to at least commit 1 crime to get the value off of the Sphinx. The other thing Roxanne does, those meteor tokens tap for more than 1 colored mana, or like any colored mana. So it fixes you when you do need the fixing. So that's my reasoning for as well, just another strong point why Roxanne might have been the best pick at that point.
Yeah, and all that makes perfect sense looking back. I think I was kind of a little too hard. Like I said, didn't want to play like Abzan or really green in general if I could avoid it. And also is I've been on this kick of I've been really trying to play more blue decks or just playing different colors in general because, a lot of tables in this format are going to fight over the green cards. So you want to be able to play the other stuff. Granted, blue-red just kind of sucks no matter how open it is. But blue-black has been really good for me online, which is why I'm like, okay, I want to try it and kind of go down that direction, but you can't force in team draft. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I want to talk about what you mentioned, David, about like avoiding green because you know it's likely or you feel like people are gonna fight over it. I don't think I think maybe that's probably better in a arena online or just in any 8-player draft, but I think in team draft it could be dangerous because we all know green is the best color, and if you avoid it, let's say pack one, pick one, Hollow Marauder, and there's the Outcasted Greenblade, right? So if your thought process is to avoid green, you may take the Hollow Marauder over green. And it's debatable whether Hollow Marauder is the better pick in pack one, pick one or not. But what I'm trying to say is that in team draft, it could be dangerous to just avoid green because then you're passing the green cards to your opponents. And then they're going to be able to go green because you're passing them on. Or they're going to be able to splash green or have a deck that's like has green in it, right? Like red is horrible, but if you put green in the red deck, it can still be good just because that's how good green is.
Yeah, it's more like hopefully a little red in the green deck.
Yeah, so the way I don't know if you can. I don't know. I think it's just dangerous to avoid green in team draft for that reason, and like why not? Why don't you take green? You could be the one in the 6-person pod to be in green. You don't know that, so I don't like to avoid green until I know that I'm being cut green because I want to be in green.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense, especially in a set like this where the best color is just like not just so much better, but like better at all rarities. Like even the commons are so much better, and no one's going to pass you a bomb, but at least you want to be able to play the ones you open. And yeah, and part of it was also like I want to try something different yesterday. But yeah, I mean Roxanne would have enabled all of my 4-color bullshit like just fine. So that particular
you're not gonna try something different because that was a practice.
Yeah, no, exactly. That was a practice. Yeah, I know, and it'd be different in a match. But that's the main thing. Like, I want to try different cards because yeah, we know like green is good. Everyone knows that. We have to know how to play like some of the other decks or other cards. I mean, it doesn't matter how open red blue is. It's just not happening. Yeah, it's just kind of like. I think that's also part of the reason why sealed is helpful, at least for this set, because you end up with like a pool that almost looks like a sealed pool because you're kind of in multiple colors, but you're also like trying to get value, scrape by certain things. And it's tougher when mana fixing, like you said, is lower because there's just not as many deserts open.
I think there's more nuance to the discussion as well, because I think there are certain green cards that are more splashable. And obviously everyone knows green is good, and we're trying to figure out how to play other archetypes. But we also have to try to figure out how to play green when it's so contested. Which green cards you can kind of put your foot in green a little bit. So if you open a green bomb, you have green playables. The one reason Outcaster Greenblade is so good is because it'll fix you in your pile. So a lot of my decks have been piles with green in it. And I'll have like a Dance of the Tumbleweeds, which I think is another great green card to spec on. And you're going to be fighting for it, but I think you don't have to be heavy green to still have a lot of good green cards. And, maybe your deck won't be exactly base green, but I feel like a lot of our decks will be some kind of pile of green in it.
Yeah, it's not like we need to be like heavy green to play the good stuff because there's not like a whole lot of green pips for the premium cards. You can just play even removal spells on the splash or something, and yeah, I definitely think that's like something like in this set especially that is like worth just understanding is just like just play the good cards. Don't try and be too fancy about it or say like I'm going to do something different for the sake of it. I think even in the Seth Manfield example, because later in that same draft he passed a green bomb, the 2-drop landfall guy, and that was
Bristly
like
Bill.
very questionable.
Yeah, Bristly Bill, and
Bristly
it
Bill,
was
right.
super questionable.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, you want to be, I know his reasoning was like he wanted to be fast and beat down, but like, hey, that does the same thing, and instead of just avoiding it, just play the good cards.
Right. I think another part of his decision was, oh, green's contested. I'm not going to be green. This is not going to make my deck.
If if everyone has that mentality, that would be awesome because then I get to play green. Because if everybody passes all the green cards thinking everyone else is gonna be fighting for green, you know what I mean? Like somebody's gonna get the green cards. And I would rather it be me or my team than my opponent's team.
Yeah, what I think is going to happen, there's going to be a little green dispersed throughout the table, and it's how do you make a deck that can play those good green cards and still function with the rest of the stuff you have to draft because you can't get all the good green cards.
So Brian, I think that's very interesting, your insight on it. And I want to ask you something because we were able to get a little glimpse of your deck that you drafted in the team draft last night. And you definitely told us that you got enough of the 2-drops in your deck, but your deck was actually missing some of the fixing that you would have liked. And I know in our previous podcast, we were talking about how we're letting the deserts kind of go a little more because there's so much power in these packs getting passed to you to later picks. But how do you think that affected your draft? Are you now trying to pick fixing a little more highly?
Yeah, the deserts I saw were Soured Springs, the blue-black desert, and the green-white desert. So just happened to not be my colors. So there's less deserts in team drafts, and they might not be your colors. So I was fortunate enough to get Dance of the Tumbleweeds to help me fix. And it was funny. My deck was just scrapping for fixing. So I had Intrepid Stable Master, which would help me tap to play one of my 4-drop mounts, the Quillbeast Charger. I had Roxanne, which the Meteorites helped me splash as well. But for the most part, the lack of fixing was like ringing alarm bells in my head throughout the draft because my drafting style really likes to have at least some fixing to give me flexibility. But yeah, it may be hard to come by in these team drafts, but being green gives you a few more options there.
And just to interject a little, because if I remember, so in the previous set in MKM, there was a dedicated land slot, but this time there isn't, right? Like the desert could just be one of the commons. So you're not even like guaranteed to open a certain amount. You're just kind of at the mercy of whatever's there. So like, I don't know how you approach it, but for me, it's like I'm having a hard time sometimes of like, do I just pick a good card that keeps me streamlined, or do I pick the fixing, hope to get something better down the way? And like for example, I got lucky that I wheeled the blue-black land because no one else wanted it. But if I don't wheel it, my deck would have been so much worse.
Yeah, they're so important. It's funny too because no one was in those colors that needed it, I guess, so you're able to get it late. It's always a balance where you want to build a good deck, and there might be a card that fits it, but how good is it compared to the land? I think if it's a good card for your deck and the desert is off color, and let's say you're building a blue-black deck and it's like a black-red desert, you could spec on the good card. Obviously, in blue-black, you often branch out to red a little bit for some payoffs, but it's a very delicate balancing act where we'll have to find which commons that fit our streamlined deck are actually better than picking a desert. I think on-color deserts are very high picks.
Yeah, I've been feeling that too. it just feels bad to have some powerful stuff and then not be able to cast anything. And then obviously the crime synergies are great. Other things care about deserts like occasionally. It's just kind of like knowing where that balance is, because I think in contrast, Eugene had a rough first pack where he didn't really open or get anything past that was particularly amazing, so he took mostly fixing, and it seemed to work out for him because he was just kind of willing to play whatever came to him, and he had most of the fixing at the table.
Yeah, I do think there's a premium on the first few pieces of fixing, and I think, yeah, specking on deserts that are sort of adjacent to your color pair is actually a good pick too. For example, if you're green-white, maybe getting a white-red dual desert or something, because there's a little bit of synergy in Naya for mounts. So yeah, I think those kind of deserts go up as well.
Yeah, I love all those takes. And I want to ask both of you guys a question. But before I do, to our listeners, Eugene had to step out real quick. I know he has twins, so we're not going to continue with him on the podcast here, but he gave us a lot of great insights earlier, which was amazing. So can you guys give us a little deck breakdown of your drafts? And Brian, I want to start with you. What were your pack one pick ones and how did it develop for you in this team draft?
Yeah, so my pack one pick one, I opened up the white-black desert, Forlorn Flats, Spinewoods Paladin, Getaway Glamour, Take Up the Shield, Blood Hustler, Slickshot's Show Off, that's the red flying rare with prowess, Requisition Raid, and Raucous Entertainer. That's 1 green for a 2/2. You can pay 1 and tap it to put a 1/1 counter on each creature that entered the battlefield under your control this turn. I chose Blood Hustler. I think it's a powerful card. I like starting in black or green. I think it's a little stronger than the Spinewoods Paladin. Getaway Glamour's great too, but yeah, it was a tough pick, but I like starting off with Blood Hustler here. What do you guys think?
I really like Blood Hustler too. I mean, obviously, you still want to play efficient spells even in a slower format. The fact that it's a crime both payoff and enabler is like huge. What was the rare again?
The rare was Slickshot's Show Off, the red flying rare of prowess.
Right, and like that ended up getting to me, and I did play it, but it wasn't like exciting because it's a constructed card. It like can hit pretty hard, but it ultimately is like it's not going to catch you back up, or it's not going to. It needs other stuff to function. The Blood Hustler does it will be the glue that holds together a lot of things, and I'm sure I notice myself in this format. I'm racing a lot, where I'm able to gain some life and make attacks I wouldn't normally because the opponent is just like losing that battle. And like life gain generally isn't amazing, but it seemed to work out where I can do that and people have a hard time like catching back up.
Okay, so my pack one pick two, there's Desperate Bloodseeker, Cactus Sure Shot, Canyon Crab, Eugene's favorite, Throw from the Saddle, Decisive Denial, Wanted Griff, and Stop Cold. Desperate Bloodseeker, the black 2-drop, was under consideration. I really like Cactus Sure Shot too, but Throw from Saddle, just solid removal, and I think it has enough power over Desperate Bloodseeker to choose it here.
So, Brian, I actually want to touch on something you mentioned earlier about Eugene's pick of the Canyon Crab. And it's something that came upon me when I was listening to the Limited Level Up's recent podcast. He had one of the Pro Tour players come talk to him, and he was saying his thoughts on the red and blue archetype and why you would go into it. And the way he and his other teammates on the Pro Tour thought about it was, you need a strong reason, like a really strong reason to want to go down that route and take a card in those colors, which Canyon Crab is not a reason to go into blue. So I just wanted to put that out there. I was just like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So they think about it in this similar way where like you want to pick the strong cards, but you also want a strong reason to kind of like pivot or go down this rabbit hole of cards. But to go from your pick between the Desperate Bloodseeker and Throw from the Saddle, I actually really like something that you said to me during our training sessions that we do together is 2-mana removal for us right now is a little bit more, or 2-mana interaction is a little bit more on a premium because you do want to be able, if you are trying to get to the late game, you want to be able to get to the late game. Also, double spelling is really good. And Throw from the Saddle is just an amazing card to do all of that. So I really like that from one of our training sessions.
Yeah, and it's interesting that I feel like green has a lot of reasons to get in, and you want to get into green. Whereas we're talking about Canyon Crab, you have to when getting blue, you have to find a good reason to get into it. So it is interesting that um, it's just different mindsets approaching these colors. About two-man interaction, Draw from the Saddle is interesting too because you do have to be on board, and it's a little bit of a different mindset with two-mana as opposed to like a Desert's Dew, which will keep you alive if you're a grindy, you know, committing crime deck with Blood Hustler. But it's just too good to pass here. My pack one pick 3, I see a Drover Grizzly, Vanishing Verse, which is off the breaking news beat. It's 1 and a black to exile target monocolored permanent, and it's an instant. There's Pillage the Bog. That's black, green to look at the top X cards of your library, where X is 2 times the number of lands you have in play, and choose one of them and put it into your hand. It's a sorcery, and you could plot it for 1 black, green. There's Servant of the Stinger, which is the 1 black for the 1/3 Death Touch that if you commit a crime and it deals damage to a player, you can search for any card in your library if you sacrifice it. There's Marauding Sphinx, which is the reason to go blue, and I was heavily debating that. And there's Jailbreak Scheme. So I chose Pillage the Bog here after mulling over it for a bit.
So that one is interesting because I've seen it plenty of times in other drafts and stuff, and I've never gotten the chance to play with it or even really against it. But both you and someone else in that draft had it too, right? Yeah.
Eugene had it, yeah.
And it seemed like you guys were both making really good use out of it because I saw at one point you were flipping over like 14 cards, and it's like basically a demonic tutor at that point. And the fact that you can plot it means just like late game, if you need something, either grabbing a bomb, getting a removal spell, or just something specific that when your opponent's like either out of gas or at parity is like, that seemed nuts. And seeing that definitely made me more like aware of that card and clearly worked out since it was already in the 2 colors you were in.
Yeah, for me, it's a very interesting because I think I put it on par with Servant of the Stinger in this scenario, not standalone. So I think Pillage of the Bog might be the stronger card than the Servant. But if you pack 1, pick 1 Blood Hustler, and you pack 1, pick 2 Throw from the Saddle, I think the Servant of the Stinger is the better pick because it's still a tutor on a stick, but it doesn't have the same reach as the Pillage because it has to deal damage and you have to commit a crime. So there's 2 things around actually tutoring there. But with Throw from the Saddle and its Death Touch ability, you can kill anything, and it really gums up the board at a 1/3 with Death Touch. So you could still kill anything on their side. So for me, this is a hard one. I think I would have picked the Servant of the Stinger still at 2 mana, but hearing that the gameplay went well with the Pillage of the Bog, I like that too. So maybe I would have made the wrong pick here, but that's my stance on it.
Yeah, my mindset was I think I'm going to get into a grindy deck and a grindy game, and Pillage is just going to dig me to the bomb and, like David said, removal, whatever I need. Pack 1, pick 4. I see Crom, Violent Cacophony, Dance of the Tumbleweeds, Take the Fall, Gila Courser, Geyser Drake, and Omen Port Vigilante, and I choose Dance of the Tumbleweeds. I'm really high on this card, and yeah, just in my colors fixes me.
That's great. You're just on black-green, which is a great color combination, and like, again, didn't have to do anything fancy of like, oh, I could take Crom and get value. It's just like, I'll just take a good green card or at very least mana fixing and go from there.
Yeah, I did learn a lot because I chose Crom in a similar spot. I mean, it wasn't this outrageous, but I chose Crom in a similar spot in our first team draft match against the Chumps. And Crom needs a little bit of help. It was not much more than a 2/3 flyer for me. Yeah, don't need to spread myself that thin here. Pack 1, pick 5. I see a Braided Bluff, which is the red-white dual. Desert. I see Drover Grizzly, Wanted Griff, and Red Rock Sentinel. I chose Drover Grizzly. Easy pick there. Pack 1, pick 6. I see Siphon Insight, Satoru the Infiltrator, Rictus Robber, and Jolene. This was a tough one for me, so I'm pretty green, and I mean pretty green black. I see that blue is flowing because I saw the Marauding Sphinx. So Rictus Robber is a single black pip card, but because it's not as powerful, in my opinion, as these cards with blue in them, I chose Siphon Insight being on the kind of maybe a Sultai grindy deck. What do you guys think?
So that's really interesting. I don't really care for Jolene a whole lot. She can. I'm sure there's like a Dolly Parton joke there, but like the fact that it has to like sometimes it can feel like such a house because it mana fixes and you can ping stuff and makes combat really annoying. But the fact that it trades with so much makes it really like not. I don't think it's a reason to go into another color here, or not. I don't want to say another color. It's not a reason to go into like that color pair specifically because like the big thing about red green is just that it's good because it has green in it. And I really like Siphon Insight. I ended up getting one later in the draft too, and I'm curious how that worked out for you because it was just like it was basically like draw. It was like a think twice, but since I play it off their deck, I have a little more. I can actually decide between a couple cards. I could, even just know what they have in their deck for like other games, and just sometimes, randomly steal a bomb, things like that.
Yeah, and it commits 2 crimes, which
Right.
is pretty cool for my Blood Hustler and other possible payoffs.
So how was it for you during the draft? Anything like
I did
notable, or
not
is
play
it?
it.
Oh,
I
you
did
don't
not
play
play it. I don't play it. I actually end up with red, so green, black splashing red. So Jolene could have made my deck and helped me a little bit of fixing there. But at the time, after passing Marauding Sphinx, I felt like blue was coming to me. And it did. Just to round out the rest of the pack, I choose a Vanishing Verse, a Stop Cold, a Rooftop Assassin, and a Red Rock Sentinel. In pack 2, pick 1, I open Laughing Jasper Flint, and I choose it over Throw from the Saddle, Stubborn Burlfane, Clear Shot, and Aloe Alchemist.
Jesus.
It's a crazy pack for green, but I think I can't pass the Flint. So
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear, and then it's just great on its own. Like that'd be whatever you're in, you would end up taking it.
Yeah, I had no red cards up to that point. Pack 2, pick 2. There's Murder, Bandit's Hall, Insatiable Avarice, which is the black rare that you can play 3 black when you spree to draw 3 cards, lose 3 life. Desperate Bloodseeker, and Throw from the Saddle, which I choose here. It's pretty close though.
I like this pick because it's 2 mana, 1 colorless and 1 green over the Murder, which is 2 black and a colorless. The Bandit's Hall is great for fixing. Depends on how many crimes you're committing, though. That's probably a good pick, but I still like the removal over that. The Bloodseeker is probably the other card I'm actually looking at here, but I don't think it's on par with Throw from the Saddle. So I think this is a very, very good pick.
Yeah. What I also like is that it gives you the chance to, like, again, you're just taking cheaper cards. Sometimes Throw from the Saddle is just like also a really good tempo play because it, pumps a creature, removes a blocker, and you can get in for damage. With Bandit's Hall, like it's great fixing, and I really like the card, but sometimes you're just sitting there trying to trigger it because it needs 2 crimes, and again, just like removal's good.
Yeah, we're super high on Bandit's Hall, but Eugene, who chose all the fixing, had 2, and he ended up cutting both from his deck because there's just not enough crimes. So it goes to show that it does need a little bit of the crime theme going on for it to really shine.
Yeah, it might have been good in your deck, both because you already chose the Siphon Insight. You have a Laughing Jasper Flint, which creates a crime every upkeep, I believe, or is it every draw when its triggered ability happens?
Good point. Yeah, every upkeep.
Every upkeep. You also have the Blood Hustler that commits crimes on its own body. Might have been good here to ramp up. It's still
right. Yeah.
Yeah, man. This is interesting.
But Throw from the Saddle is just too good. That's how I see it. Throw from the Saddle is just too good. It's premium. Pack 2, pick 3. I see a Lively Dirge, Spinewood's Paladin, Ambush Gigapede, and Oasis Gardener. It was tough between the Dirge, but I chose Spinewood Paladin over it. I'm not sure about this one actually.
Yeah, the dirge is very powerful. You know, you can do things like tutor. You can do things like just getting back for value.
Yeah, I could have got Jasper with it.
Right,
I don't think I
exactly.
thought about that interaction when I was picking here.
Because that was something I was doing in sealed, where I was like, wait a minute, I can search for and tutor up and bring out Seraphic Steed, and just like other little stuff here and there. I think it's a little tricky to build around because sometimes you don't always get like full value out of it, or it's like a bit too much mana to make it worth it. But at this point, because it could get back like one of your best bombs, yeah, I think that would have been the pick.
One thing to note is I was pretty low on creatures at this point, so my mindset now is I want to have enough creatures to make my throw from saddles good. So that was the deciding point for me here. But yeah, I very well could see it being the right pick. Pack 2, pick 4. I see a Patient Naturalist, a Smuggler's Surprise, which is the green rare that has spree, and you can mill cards and bring creatures from among those milled cards onto the battlefield if you play a lot of mana, and you can give your creatures a power for greater protection. Vaguely, there's Intrepid Stable Master. This is a green for 1 and a green for a 2/2 that taps for green or taps for 2 of any color if it's a mount spell. There's Rooftop Assassin and Soured Springs, the black-blue dual land. And I chose a Stable Master here over the Naturalist, but it was close for me. But I think it's just better, a little bit of a better card. Pack 2, pick 5, I choose Patient Naturalist, and then rounding out the pack, I choose Savage Smash, Aloe Alchemist Wheels, and I get Gold Rush, Seize the Secrets, and at the end of the pack, I get 2 Iron Fist Pulverizers, which I end up main decking to great effect. Pack 3, pick 1, I see a Cactarantula, a Mystical Tether, a Gila Courser, and Magda the Hordemaster. I choose Magda over those, but Cactarantula would have been so good for my deck.
It's hard not to take Magda. It's just a powerful rare, and yeah, we were able to ever trigger it, like to get the dragon.
No, in fact, after I think round 1 or maybe in the middle of round 1, I cut it from my deck because it was just a 2/2. I wasn't committing that many crimes in my deck. I think all told, I had about 9 possible triggers in my deck, and because it was off the splash by the time I got it out, it just wasn't doing anything. And I ran Iron Fist Pulverizers over it by the end. But so I'm not as high on that card as I used to be. Obviously, it can be great. So just one experience, but yeah, chose it here.
That makes sense.
And then I get past a Roxanne in for my second pick. So that was an auto pick, and I'm really happy about that. After that, I choose in pick 3, Back for More. Then I get a Full Steam Ahead in my next pack, and then rounding out the rest of the pack, I get a Mobile Homestead, a Quillbeast Charger, which is the 4-drop red mount. I get a Freestyler Commando, Ankle Biter, Highway Robbery, and then I just start cutting some blue cards because I know I'm passing to Trevor of Moldify, and he's blue-white, so I cut Geyser Drake and Jailbreak Scheme from him a little bit there. So yeah, that's the draft. Ended up pretty sweet, but no fixing, so it worked out. Obviously, the deck was able to get there, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it. I mean, a lot of your picks seemed pretty solid. You were in a good seat, just taking what kind of just worked for you, kind of realizing that the people on your left and right, because I think it ended up where Trevor was on blue-white, and that means Julius was on white-red, so you just had like black-green all to yourself.
Yeah, it was pretty sweet. I didn't get as much of the recursion. I could have gotten Lively Dirge, but I think a big strength of the green-black archetype is the recursion to get value, but Pillage the Bog ended up being pretty huge there, so in the board stalls.
Yeah, just seeing how easily you can just get whatever back or get whatever out of the deck, and then plotting it seems amazing too, just because it's like, okay, you can wait either until you need it or just you have all your mana available when you finally do use it. So
Yeah, it's so sweet because you can, get. For me, it was like I got to 7 lands and it was plotted, so I just pull it whatever out of my deck and play it. Is really cool.
Nice. So you went 2-0 in that draft?
Yeah, and I was matched up against Miro, who had a similar kind of deck, but I think Pillage just kind of put me over the top. As well as, what came to play is a Full Steam Ahead actually won me, I think, 3 or 4 games. I mean, it might have won me almost every game. So I think all but one of my games were won with Full Steam Ahead. Pretty good.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because in our very first team draft, I was playing it too, and I really liked it because it just feels like you just went out of nowhere. I'm kind of back and forth on it just because it does require like some creatures, but it also seems like you were just able to kill with like a couple of creatures because it's still a lot of damage coming through.
Yeah, I ended up adding in more creatures. My original build had like 13 or 14 creatures, but then I ended up putting 15 creatures, which is actually I haven't done that at all this format. This is my first time playing 15 creatures.
Yeah, that
Just
doesn't sound like you.
yeah, just to get that max value from Full Steam. You just pick in a little, get them around 12 life, and it just finishes them off if they try to tap out to attack or if the board stalls out. So I definitely died if I lost games with it in my hand as well. So it's a very up and down card, but it can work really well.
As always, gotta just figure out where those like synergies are, just like cards that instead of fully dismissing it and being like, oh, it's not that good, finding the spots where it is. And there's some equity to be have when your opponent's like, I'm sure since it was in between games, one of the opponents reports, hey, they had this in their deck, and then you happen to switch it up in the next match. They're like, oh wait, I didn't realize they were doing that, or I didn't realize like what they had. So changing it up, when appropriate, seemed like also a pretty solid strategy.
Yeah, like siding out counter spells could be a good example.
Yeah.
Especially in this set because they suck. Just
They're really
kidding.
bad.
It's really easy to play around, especially if you know the opponent has them.
Mm-hmm.
Phantom Interference, especially.
Speaking of which, I played against Miro, who had a similar deck to yours, and I had also Siphon Insight, which I really like, and I was excited because I also had Villainous Wealth, and so did Miro. So we both knew that going into it, and it's like, okay, we're gonna play a long stalling game, and he I just figured like, okay, whoever gets it first wins. But coincidentally, I use Siphon Insight to take his Villainous Wealth, and you can still pay it for any amount of X. I tapped out to do it for 5, and he countered it with the blue-green.
Decisive Denial.
Yeah. Which was pretty hilarious. Because I thought, like, I got him. And then, yeah. So it's kind of like a microcosm of everything of like, oh, hey, counterspell's not that very good, but when you're countering, Villainous Wealth off of the Siphon Insight, that does, and that was a really good game.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's where counterspells can have a spot when they have a Haymaker like that, or like a very expensive bomb they're going to tap out for. So yeah, definitely can't dismiss. Like you said, every card has its spots, and finding out the best way to get the most value, or it's where you can find a place to make it work, is really important.
I think that was an awesome recap of Brian's draft, and I really liked a lot of the insights we got from that. David, I'm sitting here looking at your deck, and I would love to hear at your seat, what were you thinking with your picks? I know Pac-Man picked one, Marauding Sphinx, and we were kind of down on it, but your deck turned out incredible. And I also noticed a card in here that when you were talking about how you went to the RCQ today, hand disruption, you have a binding negotiation in here too, which is very interesting. So please tell us about this. I know you had some really great interactions with your gameplay, and just kind of want to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we talked about the Marauding Sphinx in the beginning, which ended up being good. The deck as a whole, I was just kind of trying to take value cards and just see kind of what comes up. So I second picked the 2 mana, the discard spell, and I really liked it. I think it's like we talked about how Humiliate was good in my sealed deck. Just having cheap disruption and knowledge of their hand was very good, especially when everyone has some sort of bomb they want to play late game. But generally what I was doing is kind of just taking what I thought might be like powerful or something to potentially build around, and then go from there. So my first few picks were I think my first 4 picks were 4 colors. And
Yeah.
eventually I ended up in this like mostly blue-red, splashing green, and a little bit of black. Green was solely for the Villainous Wealth. But the way the deck played out, it was really just about establishing value and just I had plenty of removal to take out whatever early stuff. I did play my first match against Julius, who had a red-white aggro deck, which was tough at first because he was like I got completely like ran over because I'm still setting up my mana. But once I got going, the whole deck was just 2-for-1s. The double Crom was really nice. The Siphon Insight, like we keep talking about, when Sphinx got going, it was able to filter and everything. Just a bunch of like pretty solid. Like I was almost never running out of cards kind of thing. The main thing that I've just had trouble with is that, and I think anyone who's played like this format a little bit sees, is that just the red base removal is really tough because it's damage based. So sometimes, slick sequence doesn't always pan out because, something's bigger than 2. But for the most part, it was just really fun to play a control value game. And a lot of games would just end because my opponent has nothing left. And then there was that game against Julius where he was an aggro deck. I still had a chance to cast Villainous Wealth for X equals 5. Took 4 creatures and a removal spell. Just played everything out, and he couldn't do anything. I don't think I need to tell anyone like it's a bomb, but it was just really fun to be able to do these kinds of things when people are trying to play creatures and I'm just like able to outvalue them. Ultimately, like I'm not going to do that every time because like how Brian was struggling with fixing, I was too. I luckily had the 2 deserts, but I was definitely worried about just how my mana was going to pan out, and I was actually pretty good. Brian is definitely like our resident mana calculator. Like he just, if he tells me the mana base is good, I believe him because I would have been like, I can't do this. I can't play 4 colors. Like I shouldn't even play 3 kind of thing. But yeah, the deck was super sweet and just a really nice change of pace from earlier in the day.
I got a couple questions for you. It looks super fun. You have a knife point in there. How did that play out?
Not great. I wanted to, I thought of it as like, oh, I'll kill stuff and get value, and eventually all of the mercenaries will pump another one. And it just didn't really pan out. I know that at knife point is good. I just think it needs a specific deck. Probably just something that can do recurring crimes over and over again to really get value, or maybe something more aggressive so that the first strike matters. I just like the card so much that I was like, I was going to play it. But yeah, I probably should have cut it, but eh.
Also breaches. The the is it legend?
The prowess guy,
Breaches
yeah.
The Class Maker? Oh, does he have prowess? No. Breaches has whenever
Menace.
Menace, yeah. How was he?
He's okay. Honestly, could have been anything. Like, yeah, Menace is nice to attack. The ability never matters. It was just more like, okay, I'm in blue-red. I'll play something that like hits decently. He was just fine.
Okay, I'm also wondering about Slickshot. I think you talked about it not being super great.
Yeah, I mean, what's nice about it is that sometimes it can hit for the last few points of damage out of nowhere. Honestly, it was just better as a 2-drop to get in the way. And
Right.
Opponents are sometimes scared to attack into it because, like, if I at instant speed play something, it's a 3-power blocker. I took it partly as a money draft because it was my 3rd pick, and partly because it was just a rare that I wanted to see like if it could work.
Oh, how much is it worth, David?
At the time of recording, let's see. I remember it was like one of the money rares at first.
Yeah. I totally didn't even think about that. I surprised it got to you. It's like
I think it's gone down. Let me see. It is hovering around $14. Not bad.
decent. No, okay, so when you money drafted it, you thought it was a little more than that, maybe?
I remember it being a little more, but I also like don't really look at prices. I just remember that being one of the cards that's like worth something.
Wow, David, learning the money draft ways.
Not great and limited.
David, I have a quick thing I want to say from what you said earlier, and kind of just a reminder to our audience. It's something that Eugene brought up to me one time when we were talking about the white-blue archetype in this meta during all the pre-release stuff. So we were just kind of contemplating on what things were and how things were going to play out. And I thought, because Arena allows you kind of an insight to knowing that your opponent has something, it kind of takes away from the experience of like, okay, I'm not going to get got by this counter spell. I'm not going to get caught by this combat trick or something like that. But in a live in-person draft, you don't get those little stops that you normally get in Arena. And if you're so used to playing on Arena, you get kind of, I want to say, used to knowing. And it kind of sets off a little bit of a fear in you when you're like, okay, you have the six shot show off at a 1-2 on the battlefield. Do I want to attack into that this turn? Because I don't know if you have an instant in your hand and you have untapped mana, and could be that you have 3 lands in your hand and no other spells, and I'm free to attack. I would know that on Arena, or at least be able to discern that on Arena. And in real person play, I got to really think about that. And that's like, if I then pass my turn, I just pass the whole turn there. So that is interesting about the 6-shot show off that you mentioned, just kind of having that thing where like your opponents didn't want to attack into that. And maybe, and again, Matt Sperling was on Limited Level Ups, the Pro Tour gentleman that we were talking about earlier. And that's kind of one of the things he mentioned was that Alex asks him how he got better at drafting and getting up to those higher levels. And he said that it wasn't just about getting better at the draft portion. It was actually getting better at the play portion after the draft that really elevated his level. And it really has to do with just being a well-rounded player and thinking about little interactions like that. Like, is this going to give my opponent something to think about that they wouldn't normally think about, which I really, really like that interaction. So good on you, man. That's cool. And I know it was a money pick, but I think it was also just a good pick just to mess with your opponents.
Yeah, in that same podcast, Sperling just talks about like you have to like want to learn, and there's like a little bit of like, okay, you have to accept like you don't know. And I'm pretty willing, maybe too much so, to be like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing, so I'll just try stuff. And some people are pretty confident with their picks or like their ratings, and they could be right. But this draft, I definitely like was willing to try something different because, it's for fun. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all for fun. But it was like, okay, I'm not gonna like let my team down if I draft a pile just because I wanted to do something different. I mean, we ended up winning the draft anyways, and I went 1-1 with the deck, but. Yeah, I just think it's like, yeah, I'm going to try something different, see what other little things come up. And you never know, maybe my opponent does something similar and I can think, wait a minute, like I know what I would do in this situation. Like, it's not the same kind of get got because I've seen it before.
I love that. And also, I think we, just in the beginning, when we were telling you to choose Roxanne over the Marauding Sphinx, just goes to show our own personal bias as well, because I think that you were willing to try out the Marauding Sphinx, and just looking at this deck build, I really love it. And it looks like it has the perfect home in this deck, and you made the optimal choice at that point in time. And if you have added it to this deck and you minus the Marauding Sphinx from here, it would have really taxed your mana, because to have 2 pips that need green, I think you might have needed 1 more green source in this deck, which would have hindered the deck in some ways. Possibly made it better. Possibly your picks later would have been different if you had Pat won't pick that one. So we don't know. But I like that you took the chance, and the deck looks awesome.
Yeah, it was definitely fun. So we'll see how that goes the next time we do a team draft. But in general, like, I don't want to be afraid of it because someone has to end up, in certain colors.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I thought this was an incredible conversation. A lot of great insights. Big thank you to Multi5 for the team just getting out there, giving us those practice matches before the real matches, the tournament matches. Good on you, David, for getting out there and getting in real life play. A huge recommendation for anyone listening to the podcast. Go out there, get in the mix of it, join some of these things. They're a lot of fun, and kind of like support your local game stores, because I know that they struggle with their own thing. And it's just a lot of fun getting into the mix with the community rather than just grinding in your bedroom on Arena. But this is Artcast. We're signing off. I'm going to say goodbye on Eugene's behalf. Like I said, he was here earlier. He just had to sign off. We will be back next time with another episode. Gentlemen, please, anything you guys would like to say before we sign off here?
Feels like we learned a lot even just talking it out today. So hope you guys are learning too.
Yeah, hope everyone enjoys it. If not, this is fun for us at very least. So if no one listens, I'm cool with that. Also, follow my cookie business on Instagram, Damn Good Cookies. Just saying, delivering to the San Gabriel Valley area. So hit me up.
You heard it here first. Damn good cookies. Go give them a follow. We're gonna link it in the show descriptions on Spotify. We'll try to link it up on the YouTube, and that's us signing out. So take it easy. Peace.
Later, guys.
See ya.